Welcome back to Fox Recaps. Today, I'm going to explain the movie The Pianist, released in the year 2002. The movie opens up in September 1939 in Warsaw, Poland, during the onset of World War II, with the introduction of Władysław Szpilman, a pianist for the local radio station. The German army has beaten the Polish army in 3 weeks, and the radio station in which Szpilman is playing is suddenly bombarded. Panicked, all workers in the building start running out to save their lives. On his way out, Szpilman meets his buddy, Żurek, who introduces him to his sister, Dorota. Dorota mentions that she likes Szpilman's way of playing the piano, and Szpilman is also drawn to her right away. Later, when Szpilman arrives home, he discovers his parents, brother, and 2 sisters packing their belongings to leave Poland. As they're debating whether or not they can effectively depart Poland, they hear about the UK and France declaring war against Germany. With the news, the family rejoices, assuming that once the Allies are able to engage Germany, the war would come to an end. As a result, they decide to stay. Unfortunately, the series of events doesn't go as the family presumed. In Warsaw, the situation for Jews soon starts deteriorating. German Nazis invade the place and impose harsh rules on them. The Jews are not allowed to keep more than 2,000 zlotys. They are forbidden to walk on the footpaths. They cannot even sit in the restaurants to eat. And lastly, they're forced to wear a large symbol over their coat whenever they walk outside. Later, Szpilman meets Dorota, who follows him about Warsaw to learn about the injustices that Jews are subjected to under the new Nazi dictatorship. Businesses that used to be nice to them are suddenly refusing to accept their presence. 2 Nazi officers even stop Szpilman's father from walking on the municipal sidewalk, and when he protests, one of the officers punches him in the face. The situation gets even worse when the Jewish families are forced to relocate to a new district built by Nazis, which is to be walled out from the rest of the city. Szpilman's family, which had been wealthy prior to the war, is brought to subsistence status, but they still remain better than many of their fellow Jews in the cramped, famished, disease-ridden ghetto. Szpilman and his brother Henryk are compelled to sell books to earn some money for their family, but sadly, no one is interested in buying them. In the next scene, a Jewish police officer and one of Henryk's friends, Heller, visits Szpilman's new home and tells the brothers that they should join the Jewish army and save their family from facing problems. However, Henry refuses his offer, stating that he will not be able to beat his own people and behave rudely with them. Szpilman also rejects his proposal, mentioning that he's got his own work to do. Later, Szpilman can be seen playing the piano in a ghetto restaurant where the rich Jews gather. Meanwhile, the living conditions in the ghetto continue to deteriorate, and numbers of Jews die every day from diseases, starvation, and random acts of violence by German soldiers. Szpilman is not happy with his job and wants to do something for his community. After work, he visits his old friend who distributes illegal newspapers with an aim to revolt against the Nazis. However, his friend refuses to take him to his side, claiming that musicians are bad at revolting and speaking out for the crowd. Later, on his way back home, Szpilman tries to save a boy from being beaten by Nazi soldiers while trying to escape from underneath a barrier wall. Unfortunately, the little boy falls unconscious, though Szpilman succeeds in pulling him to the other side. Late at night, while Szpilman's family is having dinner, they witness the German soldiers marching into a house across the street and capturing a family. The head of the soldiers' group asks the family to greet them, but when the eldest man of the family, who is confined to a wheelchair, does not stand and greet them as instructed, the soldiers carry him and throw him off the balcony. The other family members are then brought down on the road and shot to death. The ones who are injured are killed by running their jeep over their bodies. Szpilman's family gets very scared and disturbed after seeing all this. In the next scene, after taking Henryk from the police custody, Szpilman gets to know that they'll be requiring an employment certificate to save their family from being transported to a labor camp. Szpilman then asks his friend, Jehuda, who in turn instructs Mezurek, an ex-soldier, to help Szpilman with the certificates. Later, Mezurek helps Szpilman's father get an employment certificate from a clothing factory. Despite having the certificate, in March 1942, the family is compelled to leave their house and gets transferred to a factory warehouse along with other Jews. Sadly, one day the family is chosen to be sent to a concentration camp. The remainder of the family is transferred to the Umschlagplatz to await transport, while Henrik and Halina are chosen and taken away by German soldiers. The next day, when the family arrives at a train station, Halina and Henrik also arrive there and the family reunites. The father takes the family's last 20 zlotys to buy a piece of candy. He then cuts the candy into 6 small pieces and shares it with each member of the family. Soon, the transport train arrives and all of the Jewish families are asked to board the train. While Spielmann is walking towards the train with his family, he's dragged from the queue by Heller, who asks him to run away from there. Spielmann does not understand and tries his best to be with his family, but Heller suggests Spielmann run away from there as he just saved his life. With no options left, Spielmann reluctantly runs away, while the rest of his family board the train and leave. After that, he goes to meet Jehuda, but unfortunately finds his family dead outside their house. Later, he arrives at the restaurant where he used to work earlier and gets sad after finding it empty. Suddenly, when Spielmann is about to return back, his boss, Benek, calls him from his hiding place and asks him to get inside. He then stresses that they need to hide there for a few days until one of his soldier friends arrive there and rescues them. Later, Benek and Spielmann mix in with the 10% or so of the Jews left in the ghetto. They're given the work of knocking down the ghetto's brick walls and erecting apartment homes for the new non-Jewish occupants. While the Jews are being forced to rebuild the walls under arduous and cruel conditions, Spielmann suddenly spots his old friend, Janina Godluska, but she quickly disappears in the crowd. In the following scene, when Spielmann discovers that certain Jews are plotting a revolt against Nazis, he assists them in bringing weaponry into the ghetto. Unfortunately, one day he drops a load of bricks while carrying them and gets cruelly thrashed by a Nazi commander. He is then given a new job of distributing building supplies to the employees. There too, he assists with the smuggling of weapons in potato sacks, which will be handed to resistance fighters on the other side of the wall. One day, Spielmann is almost apprehended by a German officer who suspects him of concealing something in a sack of beans. Following this near miss, he chooses to flee and tries his chances in a larger city, searching for Janina. With the help of Mojarek, Spielmann manages to get out of the labor camp and find Janina and her husband, who welcome him warmly. After providing food and clothes to Spielmann, Janina's husband takes him to his caretaker, Gebczynski, who provides Spielmann with a hiding spot for one night. The next day, Gebczynski leads Spielmann to a vacant apartment near the ghetto wall, in which he can survive on smuggled food. However, Gebczynski mentions that he must be silent because the building also contains numerous non-Jews who assume that the flat is vacant. From the apartment, Spielmann observes part of the Jewish ghetto rebellion of April-May 1943, which he helped smuggle guns for. After a few days, he again watches the revolt, but unfortunately, it's getting suppressed and the supporters are getting killed by Nazi soldiers. In the next scene, Gebczynski arrives at the apartment and suggests Spielmann run away from there, as Nazi soldiers could be there any moment. Spielmann, however, decides to stay put since he feels safe inside the apartment. Gebczynski offers him an address to go to in case of an emergency, and then walks away, strongly advising Spielmann to not be captured alive by the Nazis. A few months pass by, and Spielmann is still staying in the same flat. One day, he shatters a number of plates in a desperate search for food. The loud sound blows his cover, and he is compelled to flee the apartment as an enraged non-Jewish woman suspects him of being Jewish. After successfully escaping from the apartment, Spielmann heads to the emergency address provided to him by Gebczynski. When he arrives there, he unexpectedly runs into Dorota, who is now married and is also pregnant. Spielmann inquires about her brother, and she replies that he is dead. After Dorota's husband arrives, Spielmann is provided with some food and then hidden in another abandoned apartment. There's also a piano in the apartment, but Spielmann has no permission to play it, as he has to stay silent there. In the initial days, he's properly fed by his new caretaker, Zalas, but after a few weeks, the latter becomes complacent and stops providing food. As a result, Spielmann suffers from jaundice and becomes incredibly weak. A few weeks later, Dorota and her husband pay him a visit and discover that he is severely ill. Soon, they call a doctor who performs a full-body checkup of Spielmann and suggests he take a rest. In the next scene, Spielmann regains his power in time to see the wider 1944 Warsaw Revolt, in which the Polish people attempt to reclaim control of their city. Soon after, the Germans stormed the building, forcing him to leave. The Poles had hoped that the oncoming Soviet Red Army would assist them, but sadly, the Russians did not arrive, allowing the Germans to put down the uprising and expel the entire population of Warsaw. Spielman takes refuge at an abandoned hospital across the street from his last hiding. Later, he exits the hospital and jumps back over the wall into the ghetto, which is now an abandoned, lonely wasteland of bricks and debris since the Germans have chosen to burn Warsaw to ashes. Spielman hides there, searching among burned-out buildings for food, and continues to shelter until he's discovered one night by a Nazi officer named Captain Wilm Hossenfeld. Scared, Spielman asks to be spared as he is a professional pianist. When the captain asks him to prove it, Spielman plays a beautiful song on the piano for the first time in years. Hossenfeld is impressed by Spielman's performance, and he assists him in hiding in the attic. He even supplies Spielman with regular food in an attempt to keep him alive. When the Russian army finally approaches Warsaw, Hossenfeld and his employees are forced to flee the residence. Spielman receives a final delivery of supplies from Hossenfeld, as well as his overcoat. He inquires about Spielman's surname, which resembles Spielmann, the German word for a pianist. Hossenfeld says he'll keep an ear out for Spielman on the radio. Before leaving, he also informs Spielman that he only has to live in fear for a few more days as the Red Army will soon conquer Warsaw. After a few days, Spielman spots Polish partisans and walks outside in pleasure to greet his comrades. They mistakenly believe he's a German after seeing his coat, which Hossenfeld gave him, and attempt to shoot him. Luckily, after he surrenders and comes forward, the officers recognize him as a Polish citizen and stop the firing. The scene then fast-forwards some months, where Hossenfeld is one of the detainees in an impoverished Russian POV camp. Nearby, a group of Polish Jews have just been liberated, and when Hossenfeld learns that one of them is a musician, he walks to the fence and tells him that he assisted Spielman. He then asks him to persuade Spielman to repay the favor, before a Russian soldier puts him back down on the ground. After a few days, the Polish musician brings Spielman to the place where Hossenfeld had been kept. Sadly, when they arrive, the whole camp has been relocated without any trace. Unable to help his friend, Spielman returns to the radio station to play the piano. In the last part of the movie, it is shown that Hossenfeld perished in a Soviet prison in 1952, and Spielman lived for 88 years before he died in Poland in 2000. The movie ends with Władysław Spielman joyously performing Chopin's Polonaise Brillante in concert with a full orchestra. That was all from the video. I hope you liked it. Subscribe for more content like this, and hit the like button to help us out. Also, leave a comment if you want us to recap your favorite movie.